The crumpled $500 bill was damp with sweat, pressed into Tiana's palm by a hand so small it barely covered her thumb. Around them, the glass towers of the luxury district loomed like cold, silver giants, reflecting a world she worked 3 jobs just to walk through. "Please," the boy whispered. His voice was a thin thread snapping against the roar of the city's indifferent traffic. He wasn't looking at the money, he was looking at her, with eyes so hollowed out by loneliness they looked like bruised glass. "Here's $500. Can you just be my mom for today?" Tiana froze, the shopping bags from the boutique she'd just cleaned biting into her fingers. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a prank. This was a child begging for a soul. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. It is so good to have you here with us today. Before we dive into this heart-shattering journey, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far our community reaches. How are you all doing? I hope you're holding your loved ones a little tighter today. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and join our family. Your support is the heartbeat of these stories, and we have so much to get through today. Trust me, you aren't going to want to miss a single second of this one. Tiana Miller knew what it was like to be invisible. As a Black woman in a city that treated her like part of the furniture, she had learned to move like a shadow, efficient, quiet, and unnoticed. But the boy in front of her, dressed in a suit that cost more than her yearly rent, saw her. He didn't see a cleaner or a stranger. He saw a lifeline. His hair was perfectly coiffed, but his knees were shaking. 10 feet behind him, 2 men in razor-sharp black suits stood like statues, their hands hovering near their waistbands, their eyes hidden behind dark lenses. They weren't nannies. They were hunters. "Sweetheart," Tiana breathed, kneeling so she was eye level with him, ignoring the predatory shift of the guards behind him. "Where is your real mom?" The boy's lip trembled, a single tear carving a path through the dust on his cheek. "She's gone. And my father, he only talks to the ghosts." A cold shiver raced down Tiana's spine. She felt the weight of the $500, not as currency but as a ransom note for a childhood. She looked up and locked eyes with one of the guards. The man didn't move, but the air around him crackled with a lethality that made her blood run cold. She knew with a sudden, terrifying instinct that this boy wasn't just wealthy. He was property. And he was currently trying to buy a piece of her heart to escape a golden cage. "Just for today?" the boy begged, his grip on her hand tightening until it hurt. "I just want to go to the park. I just want to hold someone's hand who isn't wearing a holster." Tiana looked at the guards, then back at the desperate dark eyes of the boy. She knew she should walk away. She knew that getting involved with people who traveled with armed security was a one-way ticket to a grave. But then the boy did something that shattered her resolve. He leaned his forehead against her shoulder and let out a sob so jagged it tore through her chest. "Okay," she whispered, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Just for today. I'm your mom." She didn't see the lead guard reach for his earpiece. She didn't see the black SUV with tinted windows pull up to the curb like a shark scenting blood. She only felt the small, trembling hand in hers. She had no idea she had just declared herself the most wanted woman in the city. Not by the law, but by a man who didn't believe in mercy. The weight of the boy's hand in hers felt like a lead weight and a feather all at once. Tiana led him away from the looming shadows of the high-end boutiques, her mind racing. She was Tiana Miller, daughter of a woman who had worked 3 shifts at a diner in Georgia to put her through a community college she eventually had to drop out of. She was a survivor, a woman who knew the exact price of a gallon of milk and the exact time the streetlights flickered to life, signaling it was time to lock her triple-bolted door. "What's your name, baby?" she asked softly, keeping her pace steady even as she felt the heavy, synchronized footsteps of the 2 guards trailing them at a lethal distance. "Minho," the boy whispered. "Minho Park." "Well, Minho, I'm Tiana. But I guess for today, I'm Mom." She watched him out of the corner of her eye. Minho didn't walk like a 7-year-old, he marched. His shoulders were squared, a habit drilled into him by men who valued posture over play. He was the crown prince of a kingdom built on silence and scars. Tiana felt an overwhelming surge of protective fury. She remembered her own mother's hands, rough, smelling of dishwater and lemon zest but always warm. Minho's life smelled of expensive cologne, sterilized leather, and the metallic tang of unspoken threats. As they walked toward the city's central park, Tiana's thoughts drifted to her own empty apartment. She had moved to this concrete jungle with dreams of being an interior designer, of filling rooms with color and light. Instead, she spent her days scrubbing the baseboards of people who didn't know her last name. Her deepest fear wasn't the poverty, it was the fading. The idea that she would vanish into the gray architecture of the city without ever having truly touched another soul. Behind them, the lead guard, a man whose jacket couldn't quite hide the bulk of a shoulder holster, spoke into a wrist-mounted mic. Tiana didn't need to hear the words to know they were being reported. "Target is moving," the guard Elias Thorne muttered. Elias had served the Park family for a decade. He had seen the Great Dragon, Junho Park, dismantle rival syndicates with the clinical precision of a surgeon. He had also seen Junho stare at his son for hours without saying a single word, his face a mask of stone. Elias saw the way the woman, the tall, graceful black woman with the tired eyes and the fierce grip, looked at the boy. It was a look no one in the Park estate was allowed to have. It was dangerous. It was human. "Minho," Tiana said as they reached the edge of the grass, "if we're doing this, we're doing it right. No more suits. No more marching." She stopped at a street vendor and bought a cheap, oversized, "I Love New York" t-shirt and a pair of colorful sunglasses. She watched the guards tense as she pulled Minho into the alcove of a closed kiosk. "Put this on," she commanded gently. For the first time Minho smiled. It was a small, flickering thing like a candle in a gale. "Father says I must always be prepared to represent the family." "Today you aren't representing a family," Tiana said, pulling the cotton shirt over his stiff blazer. "You're representing a kid who wants an ice cream that's going to drip on his chin." She saw the flicker of something in his eyes. A hidden secret. He looked back at the guards and then leaned into Tiana's ear. "My real mom. She didn't leave because she didn't love me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "She left because she was scared of the dragon. Everyone is scared of the dragon." Tiana's heart skipped. The dragon. She'd heard the whispers in the hallways of the corporate offices she cleaned. The name was spoken in hushed tones by CEOs and janitors alike. Junho Park. A man who owned the docks, the dirt, and the politicians. She looked at the $500 still crumpled in her pocket. It wasn't enough. Not for this. But then Minho reached up and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his touch tentative as if he expected her to shatter. "You have kind eyes," he said. "Like the stories." Tiana realized then that her motivation had shifted. It wasn't about the money, and it wasn't just about a lonely Saturday. She was a woman who had been denied a voice her whole life, and here was a child being silenced by a literal empire. If she could give him 8 hours of noise, 8 hours of being seen, she would face any dragon. She caught Elias Thorne watching her. He didn't look like he wanted to kill her anymore. He looked like he was pitying her. Because he knew what Tiana didn't. Junho Park didn't like people touching his belongings. And Minho was his most precious, most neglected possession. "Come on, Minho," Tiana said, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Let's go find that ice cream." "And Elias?" she called out, turning to the guard. The man froze, surprised she knew his name or cared to use it. "Keep your distance," she said firmly. "A mother needs some space with her son." Elias hesitated, his hand going to his ear, likely waiting for the order to end her right there. But the voice on the other end, the cold, melodic baritone of Junho Park himself, simply said, "Follow. Let the play act continue. I want to see what this woman thinks a soul is worth." Tiana turned away, her hand firmly in Minho's, heading toward the bright colors of the playground. She was walking into a storm, but for the first time in years she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The sun was high now, turning the park's lake into a sheet of hammered gold. For 3 hours, Tiana had managed to weave a bubble of normalcy around Minho. They had eaten hot dogs with too much mustard, laughed at the aggressive squirrels, and now they were sitting on a bench near the carousel. Minho was sticky, his expensive slacks stained with grass, and he looked more alive than Tiana suspected he had been in years. "Mom?" Minho asked, the word coming more naturally now, though it still sent a pang through Tiana's chest. "Do you think people can ever really change? Or are they just born as shadows?" Tiana looked at him, startled by the depth of a 7-year-old's existential dread. "I think we're all born as light, Minho. The shadows are just things people pile on top of us." We have to choose to shake them off. My father says shadows are the only things that stay loyal, he whispered. Before Tiana could respond, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound but a sudden violent silence. The birds seemed to stop chirping. The distant laughter of other children felt muffled, as if the air had grown thick and heavy. Elias Thorne and the other guard, who had been maintaining a 20-foot perimeter, suddenly snapped to attention. They didn't just stand up straight, they bowed. Their heads went down, their spines curved in a gesture of absolute terrified submission. A black sedan, sleek and silent as a predator in the tall grass, had pulled onto the pedestrian path, ignoring the no vehicles signs. The door opened and a man stepped out. He wasn't a giant, but he commanded the space like he owned the oxygen within it. He wore a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the sunlight. His hair was black as a raven's wing, and his face was a masterpiece of cold, aristocratic cruelty. This was Junho Park, the dragon. Tiana felt the instinct to run, the primal urge to grab Minho and vanish into the trees. But her feet were rooted. She felt Minho's small hand begin to tremble violently in hers. "Father," the boy choked out. Junho didn't look at his son. His eyes, dark, calculating and dangerously intelligent, were locked on Tiana. He walked toward them, his movements fluid and lethal. Each step felt like a heartbeat thumping in Tiana's throat. "I was told," Junho began, his voice a low melodic rumble that made the hair on Tiana's arms stand up, "that my son had found a bargain. $500 for a mother." He stopped 3 feet away. The scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco rolled off him. He looked down at the "I Love New York" shirt Minho was wearing, his lip curling in a faint mocking sneer. "You've ruined his clothes," Junho said, finally meeting Tiana's gaze. "And you've filled his head with the idea that the world is a playground. Neither of these things is true." Tiana swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "He's a child, Mr. Park. He should be in a playground. He was starving, and I don't mean for food." The guards winced. No one spoke to Junho Park like that. No one. Junho's eyes narrowed, a flash of something, curiosity? Fury, flickering in the depths of those dark orbs. He stepped closer, invading Tiana's personal space until she could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "You're Tiana Miller. You live on 4th Street. You clean the offices of Henderson and Sons. You have no criminal record, no children of your own, and exactly $42 in your savings account." The blood drained from Tiana's face. He knew everything. "And yet," Junho continued, reaching out with a gloved hand to tilt her chin up, "you think you have the authority to tell me what my son needs? A woman who has nothing." "I have more than you," Tiana snapped, the fear turning into a cold, defiant heat. "I have a heart that isn't made of stone. He asked me to be his mother because you've forgotten how to be a father." The silence that followed was deafening. Elias Thorne looked like he was preparing to dispose of a body. But then the unexpected happened. Junho didn't strike her. He didn't signal the guards. Instead, he let out a short, dry laugh, a sound devoid of mirth but full of sharp edges. "A heart," Junho mused. "A liability in our world." He turned his gaze to Minho. "The boy thinks he wants a mother. I think he wants a distraction. But there is a problem, Ms. Miller. My enemies have seen you today. They have seen my son hold your hand. In my world, that makes you a target. You aren't just playing mom anymore. You've just walked into a crosshair." Suddenly, a red dot appeared on Junho's chest. Then another on Minho's shoulder. "Get down!" Junho roared. The world exploded. The sound of a high-caliber rifle shattered the peace of the park. A bullet whistling inches from Tiana's ear and slamming into the wooden bench behind them. Before she could scream, Junho's arms were around her and Minho, throwing them toward the armored sedan. He wasn't the cold statue anymore, he was a shield. "Elias, return fire!" Junho screamed, his voice raw with a protective ferocity that shocked Tiana. As they scrambled into the back of the car, bullets thudding against the reinforced glass like heavy rain, Tiana realized her one day was over. She wasn't a stranger anymore. She was a witness, a protector, and a piece in a game she didn't understand. "Why are you doing this?" she gasped as the car roared away, tires screeching. "You don't even know me." Junho sat back, his breathing heavy, a smear of blood, his own or someone else's, on his sharp jawline. He looked at her and for the first time the mask of the dragon slipped. He looked like a man who was drowning. Because he chose you, Junho said, his voice barely a whisper over the sound of the sirens. And in my family once a choice is made there is no going back. You're coming with us. For your safety, and for his. Tiana looked at Minho who was curled into her side, sobbing silently. She looked at the $500 bill now stained with the dirt of the park floor. The bargain was sealed. She had bought her way into the heart of the Mafia, and the price was going to be much higher than $500. The park estate was not a home. It was a fortress of glass and cold basalt perched on a cliff overlooking the gray churning Atlantic. Inside the air was filtered and silent, smelling of expensive wax and the faint, ozone tang of a high-tech security system. Tiana sat on the edge of a velvet sofa in a room that felt more like a museum gallery than a living space. She had been here for 6 hours. In that time she had watched a team of private doctors treat a graze on Junho's shoulder. A wound he didn't even flinch at, and she had seen Minho ushered away by a stern woman in a gray uniform. Every time Tiana tried to stand a guard appeared at the door. Not Elias but others, men with faces like granite. She felt the walls closing in. She was a bird of paradise trapped in a cage of shadows. "You're pacing," a voice remarked from the doorway. Tiana spun around. Junho stood there, now changed into a silk black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and a sprawling tattoo of a dragon's tail winding toward his wrist. He looked less like a businessman and more like the predator the rumors claimed him to be. "I want to go home," Tiana said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her knees. "The day is over. I've done what the boy asked." "The world outside that gate has changed for you, Ms. Miller," Junho said, walking toward a sideboard and pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass. "The men who fired those shots today were from the Beck Syndicate. They don't see a kind stranger. They see a lever. A way to pry a confession or a concession out of me by using you. Then let me go to the police." Junho's laugh was short and bitter. "The police are just another syndicate with better branding. Well, you stay here. Until I find who leaked my son's location today, you are the safest person in this city, as long as you stay behind these walls." He stepped closer and Tiana realized with a start how tall he was, how the heat seemed to radiate off him. He wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a man holding 1,000 spinning plates of violence and betrayal. "I'm not a prisoner," Tiana whispered, her defiance sparking again. "And I'm not your subordinate." "No," Junho murmured, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "You are something much more troublesome. You are the first person my son has smiled at since his mother's funeral." Before Tiana could process the weight of that admission, a small figure darted past Junho. Minho, now in silk pajamas, threw himself at Tiana's waist. "You didn't leave," he cried, his face buried in her denim skirt. "I told them you wouldn't leave." Tiana's heart broke. She looked at Junho over the boy's head. The dragon was watching them and for a fleeting second his expression wasn't one of stone. It was one of profound, agonizing envy. He didn't know how to do what she was doing. He didn't know how to be the son. "I'm here, Minho," she whispered, stroking his hair. Over the next few days the tension in the house escalated, but so did something else. An uneasy electric bridge between Tiana and the man who held her captive. She refused to sit idle. She found the kitchen, a cold, industrial space, and began to cook. The scent of garlic, paprika and slow-simmered soul food began to drift through the sterile hallways, clashing with the scent of ozone and expensive cologne. One night she found Junho in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at a plate of cornbread she had left out. "It's not poisoned," she said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up, startled. "I don't doubt the food, Ms. Miller. I doubt the motive. Why are you still being kind? I am keeping you here against your will." "Because," Tiana said, walking into the light of the stove, "Minho needs to see that not every relationship is a transaction. And maybe you do too." She reached out, a move that would have gotten anyone else tackled to the ground, and adjusted the collar of his shirt. Her fingers brushed the warm skin of his neck. The air between them thickened, a different kind of danger altogether. Junho didn't pull away. He leaned into the touch, a microscopic movement that spoke of years of touch starvation. "You're a dangerous woman, Tiana Miller," he rasped, his hand coming up to hover near her waist, never quite touching, but the heat was unmistakable. You make me want to believe in things that get men like me killed. Like what? Peace, he whispered. But the peace was a lie. The next morning, Tiana found a note tucked under her door. It wasn't from Junho. It was a grainy photo of her apartment building, the front door kicked in. Attached was a single line in Korean, which Minho translated with a trembling voice. The dragon's new heart is easy to find. The Beck syndicate wasn't waiting for her to leave. They were coming for her life to prove Junho was weak. And as Junho tore through the house, screaming orders and checking clips in his sidearm, Tiana realized the rising tension wasn't just about the gunman outside. It was about the fact that she was starting to care if the dragon survived the night. Hey everyone, if you're as gripped by this as I am, don't forget to leave a comment below. What would you do in Tiana's shoes? Would you stay for the boy or run for your life? Let me know, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next twist. The atmosphere in the park estate shifted from a cold museum to a war room. Red lights pulsed along the baseboards of the hallways, the silent alarm of a breach. Junho was a whirlwind of controlled violence, barking orders into a radio in a language that sounded like cracking bone. Tiana clutched Minho's hand in the center of the reinforced library, her eyes darting toward the security monitors. She saw the perimeter fences glowing, electric countermeasures activated. But her mind was stuck on the photo. Her apartment. Her life, as meager as it was, had been violated. You have to go, Tiana said, her voice trembling but sharp as she looked at Junho, who was checking the feed of a hidden camera. You have to stop them. Junho turned, his face a mask of sweating marble. The Beck syndicate doesn't want your apartment, Tiana. They wanted me to know they could get to you. It was a distraction. A distraction from what? Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the library swung open. Elias Thorne stepped in, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two men Tiana didn't recognize, members of Junho's own inner circle. They weren't looking at the monitors. They were looking at Junho. Sir, Elias said, his voice devoid of its usual robotic loyalty. The council has reached a decision. You've become distracted. Bringing a civilian into the sanctum? Letting a child dictate the movements of the dragon? It's a liability we can no longer afford. Tiana felt the air leave the room. This wasn't an external attack. It was a coup. Junho didn't reach for his gun. He stood perfectly still, his eyes narrowing. Elias, I gave you everything. I saved you from the gutters of Busan. And I gave you 10 years of silence, Elias countered, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol. But the syndicate is offering stability. They don't care about hearts or playing mom. They care about the docks. And they want the boy. Minho let out a strangled whimper, hiding behind Tiana's legs. You won't touch him, Tiana snapped, stepping forward. The sheer audacity of her movement, a woman with no weapon, no power, standing against 3 armed killers, made Elias pause. Move aside, Ms. Miller, Elias said. You were a mistake. A $500 mistake. Wait, Junho said, his voice dangerously low. He looked at Elias, then at the monitors showing the empty perimeter. The Becks didn't find her apartment. You gave them the address. You staged the park shooting to see if I'd bring her here. You wanted her in the house so you could use her as the catalyst for my instability. Elias didn't deny it. It worked, didn't it? Look at you. You aren't thinking about the shipment in the harbor. You're thinking about her. Then came the revelation that shattered everything. And just like Minho's mother, Elias added, a cruel smile touching his lips, she's going to be the reason you lose everything. Tell her, Junho. Tell her why the boy's mother really left. Tiana looked at Junho. The dragon looked like he had been struck. Junho. Tiana whispered. She didn't run away because she was scared of me, Junho said, his voice breaking in a way that felt like a tectonic plate shifting. She was part of the betrayal. She was an informant for the authorities. I found out and I had to choose. The family or the woman. Tiana recoiled. What did you do? I let her go, Junho rasped. I told the syndicate I killed her to satisfy their bloodlust, but I sent her away with a new identity. But she couldn't stay away. She tried to take Minho. There was an accident. A car chase. Elias was the one driving the lead car. He's the one who ran her off the road. The room went cold. Minho was shaking so hard he was vibrating. You lied to him, Tiana breathed, looking at the boy. You told him she left because of the dragon. You let him hate you so he wouldn't know the truth, that his mother was a spy and his father's right-hand man was her executioner. I did it to protect his memory of her. Junho roared, finally drawing his weapon. In that split second of raw, bleeding vulnerability, the library erupted. Elias moved, but Junho was faster. A shot rang out, shattering a crystal vase near Tiana's head. She didn't think. She grabbed a heavy bronze bust from a side table and hurled it at the nearest guard, the weight of her desperation lending her strength she never knew she had. Run! Junho screamed at her. The safe room. Behind the bookshelf. But as Tiana grabbed Minho, she saw Junho take a shoulder to the chest from Elias. They went down in a tangle of limbs and steel. Tiana realized the midpoint wasn't just a revelation of the past, it was the total collapse of the present. The man she was starting to see as a human was being consumed by the monster he had created. He had the choice. The safe room was right there. She could lock herself and the boy away and hope for the best. Or she could look at the man who had lied to his son to save a memory, the man who was currently bleeding out on a Persian rug for a woman he'd known for 3 days. Tiana didn't run to the safe room. She ran toward the fight. Before we see if Tiana survives this madness, I have to ask, have you ever found out a secret that changed how you saw someone forever? This is the moment where everything changes for our characters. If you're enjoying the intensity, please subscribe and help us grow this community. Now let's see if the dragon can rise one last time. The sound of the heavy library doors slamming shut echoed like a casket lid. But it wasn't the safe room doors, it was the main entrance. More men loyal to the syndicate and Elias flooded the room. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Tiana didn't reach the fight in time. A rough hand grabbed her by the hair, yanking her backward. She screamed, her fingers slipping from Minho's as he was snatched up by another guard. Let him go. Tiana shrieked, kicking wildly. Enough. Elias roared. He stood over Junho, who was pinned to the floor, a dark stain spreading across his silk shirt. Elias looked at Tiana, his eyes devoid of any human heat. You were supposed to be a ghost, Ms. Miller. A footnote. Instead you've become a knot in the thread. And I hate knots. With a brutal efficiency that made Tiana's stomach churn, Elias's men dragged them in opposite directions. Tiana was shoved into a windowless cellar beneath the estate, the cold stone biting into her skin. The door groaned shut, the heavy iron bolt sliding home with a finality that felt like a death sentence. She was alone in the dark. For the first time since this nightmare began, Tiana collapsed. She sat on the damp floor, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She thought of her small, sun-drenched apartment, the one that was currently being ransacked. She thought of the $500 bill, the catalyst for her destruction. What have I done? She whispered into the blackness. She wasn't a hero. She was a woman who cleaned offices. She didn't know how to pick locks or fight off trained assassins. She had tried to play mom to a boy whose world was made of glass and fire, and now that world was shattering. The silence was the worst part. Every few minutes, the muffled thud of a distant gunshot or a shout would vibrate through the ceiling, and she would imagine the worst. Was Minho crying? Was he being bundled into a car to be used as a puppet for the syndicate? And Junho? She closed her eyes and saw him, not as the dragon but as the man in the kitchen, leaning into her touch like a starving man discovering bread. She realized with a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror that she didn't just want to survive. She wanted him to survive. Hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. Time loses its shape when you're waiting for the end. Suddenly, a small vent near the ceiling rattled. Mom? A tiny, shaking voice whispered. Tiana scrambled to her feet, her hands clawing at the stone wall. Minho? Baby, are you there? I'm in the laundry chute, he sobbed, his voice echoing through the metal duct. They're taking father away. They said he has to sign the papers for the docs or they'll hurt you. They don't know I got away. Minho, listen to me, Tiana said, her voice cracking. You have to run. Go to the gate, find the button I showed you in the garden. No. Minho's voice suddenly turned sharp, a shadow of his father's iron will. I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving him. You said we aren't born as shadows. You said we have to shake them off. Tiana felt a sob catch in her throat. She had given this boy a seed of hope, and now it was blooming in the middle of a graveyard. They're coming back, Tiana. Minho whispered. I hear Elias. He's mad. He can't find the seal for the family ring. The hopelessness of the situation pressed down on her. Even if Minho was free, he was a child against an army. Junho was broken and bleeding. And she was locked in a hole. This was the moment where the story was supposed to end in tragedy. This was where the dragon died and the mother vanished. She looked around the dark cell, her eyes adjusting. There was nothing but a broken wooden crate and a rusted pipe leaking a slow, rhythmic drip of water. She felt a wave of despair so heavy she could barely stand. She had tried to buy a day of love for $500 and she had ended up paying with 3 lives. I'm sorry, Minho, she choked out, leaning her head against the cold metal of the door. I'm so sorry. But then she felt something in her pocket. Her fingers brushed against the crumpled $500 bill. It was dirty, torn, and practically worthless in a place like this. But as she pulled it out, she felt a spark of that same defiance that had made her kneel to a lonely boy in the middle of a luxury district. She wasn't a shadow. She was Tiana Miller. And she wasn't done being a mother. Minho, she said, her voice dropping to a low, fierce command. Don't run to the gate. Go to the kitchen. Find the lighter I used for the stove. And find the cleaning supplies under the sink. The ones in the green bottles. Why? Because, Tiana said, a grim smile touching her lips in the dark. It's time we showed them that a mother's fire is much hotter than a dragon's breath. The darkness of the cellar didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a cocoon. Tiana's heart hammered against her ribs, but the rhythm had changed. It was no longer the frantic pulse of a victim. It was the steady, heavy beat of a woman reclaiming her power. Minho, can you hear me? She whispered toward the vent. I have them. The boy's voice came back, smaller now, strained with the effort of crawling through the narrow vents. The green bottles. And the clicker for the stove. Good boy. Now listen carefully. There is a service elevator near the laundry room. Small but you can fit. Go to the basement level. There's a release lever on the outside of this door. You have to be my hero, Minho. Can you do that? There was a long, agonizing silence. Tiana held her breath, praying that a guard hadn't intercepted him. Then a soft, I'm coming, Mom. Tiana stood back from the door, her fingers curling around the heavy rusted pipe she had managed to wrench from the wall. She was Tiana Miller, a woman who had spent a decade being overlooked, but today she was the only thing standing between a child and a massacre. 10 minutes passed like hours. Then the sound of a heavy iron bolt sliding back scraped through the silence. The door creaked open, revealing the small, soot-stained face of Minho. He was shaking, clutching a bag of chemicals and a long-necked lighter like they were sacred relics. I did it, he gasped. Tiana pulled him into a crushing hug for a split second before pulling back. Stay behind me. We're going to the main hall. As they moved through the service corridors, Tiana's mind worked with the clinical precision she usually reserved for managing her 3 jobs. She knew the layout of the house from her days of being moved between rooms. She knew where the ventilation intake was. They reached the edge of the grand foyer. Below them, in the sunken living area, the scene was grim. Junho was zip-tied to a chair, his face a map of bruises, his charcoal shirt soaked through with blood. Elias stood over him, holding a heavy fountain pen and a stack of legal documents. Sign Junho, Elias sneered. The syndicate is losing patience. Sign the transfer, and I'll make sure the woman and the boy are buried together. It's the only mercy you have left. Junho looked up, his eyes glassy, his spirit flickering. You don't know her, he rasped, a ghost of a smile touching his bloody lips. She isn't a ghost. At that moment Tiana acted. She didn't have a gun, but she had chemistry and a mother's rage. She mixed the ammonia-based cleaner with the bleach-heavy solution in a decorative glass vase she snatched from a pedestal. Minho now, she hissed. The boy threw the lighter, its flames sparking as it tumbled through the air. At the same moment, Tiana shattered the vase against the marble pillar overlooking the foyer. The reaction was instantaneous. A thick, white choking cloud of gas erupted, billowing downward into the sunken room. What is this? Elias screamed, coughing violently as the noxious fumes hit his lungs. The guards scrambled, blinded and gasping, their tactical training useless against a localized chemical cloud. Tiana didn't wait. She charged down the stairs, the rusted pipe swinging. She wasn't a soldier, but she was a woman with a clear target. She reached Junho just as a guard tried to raise his weapon. She swung the pipe with a guttural scream, the metal connecting with the man's wrist with a sickening crack. "Tiana." Junho blinked, his vision clearing as she shielded her face with her damp scarf and began sawing at his restraints with a shard of the broken vase. "I told you," she whispered, her eyes burning from the gas but her hands steady. "I'm your mom for the day. And Mom says it's time to go home." The zip ties snapped. Junho surged upward, fueled by a sudden violent surge of adrenaline. He didn't reach for a gun, he reached for Tiana's hand. "Minho!" Junho roared, his voice regaining its draconic power. The boy leaped from the balcony into his father's waiting arms. For the first time the three of them were a single unit. Not a boss, a son and a stranger, but a family forged in the middle of a chemical fire. "Elias." Junho turned toward the lead traitor who was stumbling toward the exit, his face red and streaming with tears. "You thought I was weak because I chose a woman. You forgot that a dragon is only dangerous when he has something to lose." The turning point was complete. The fear that had paralyzed them in the cellar was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They were outnumbered and they were still in a fortress of enemies, but as Tiana looked at Junho and Minho, she knew they weren't going to die in the dark. "There's an armored transport in the subgarage," Junho said, his hand gripping Tiana's shoulder with a strength that promised protection. "If we can reach it, we can break the gate." "Then let's break it," Tiana said. The descent to the subgarage was a descent into the mouth of hell. The air in the stairwell was thick with the scent of burning rubber and the sharp ozone smell of the estate's failing security system. Junho moved with a terrifying renewed lethality, his hand never leaving Tiana's arm, pulling her and Minho through the shadows like a force of nature. "They're at the service entrance," a voice screamed from the darkness ahead. Three guards, loyal to Elias and the syndicate, stepped into the light of the flickering overhead lamps. They didn't hesitate. The first volley of gunfire chewed into the concrete walls, spraying dust and grit into Tiana's eyes. She dove behind a heavy steel pillar, pulling Minho under her body as the world dissolved into a deafening roar of lead and stone. Junho didn't cower. He snatched a discarded handgun from the floor with the grace of a dancer and fired 3 times. Each shot was a punctuation mark in a sentence of absolute authority. The guards went down before they could even register the change in the air. "Stay low," Junho commanded, his voice a rasp of iron. He looked at Tiana, his dark eyes searching hers for a flicker of regret. "I am sorry I brought this to your door, Tiana. I am sorry I made you a target." "Don't you dare apologize," Tiana snapped, her heart hammering against her ribs like a drum of war. She looked at the blood staining his shirt, then at Minho's wide, terrified eyes. "You didn't make me a target. You made me a mother. Now get us out of here." They reached the subgarage, a vast, echoing cavern of polished concrete and high-end machinery. In the center sat the Black Widow, a custom-armored transport vehicle that looked more like a tank than a car. But standing between them and the vehicle was Elias Thorne. He wasn't coughing anymore. He was holding a high-caliber rifle, his face twisted into a mask of pure, humiliated rage. Behind him, the massive steel gate that led to the cliffside road was slowly grinding shut. "You think a bit of gas and a cleaning lady can stop a decade of planning?" Elias spat, his finger tightening on the trigger. "The syndicate is already moving on the harbor. By the time the sun comes up, Junho Park will be a ghost story told to keep street thugs in line." "And what will you be, Elias?" Junho stepped out from behind the pillar, leaving himself completely exposed. "A man who betrayed his blood for a seat at a table that will eat him alive? I'll be the man who survived." Elias screamed. He fired. The bullet caught Junho in the side, spinning him around. Tiana let out a scream that felt like it was tearing her throat apart. But Junho didn't fall. He stayed on his feet, his teeth bared in a snarl. "Tiana! The car! Go!" Junho roared. Tiana didn't think. She grabbed Minho and sprinted across the open concrete. Bullets whined past her ears, one clipping the heel of her boot, but she didn't stop. She reached the transport, threw Minho into the back and scrambled into the driver's seat. She had never driven an armored vehicle. She had never driven anything more powerful than a 10-year-old sedan. But as she looked at the complex dashboard, her fingers moved with a strange ancestral memory. She slammed her hand onto the ignition. The engine roared to life, a deep, predatory growl that shook the very foundations of the estate. "Junho, get in," she screamed over the noise. Elias was reloading, his eyes wide as he realized the woman he had dismissed as a mistake was now behind the wheel of a 5-ton weapon. Junho scrambled toward the passenger side, his movements heavy and labored. Just as he reached the door, Elias leveled his rifle. "No!" Minho cried from the back. Tiana didn't wait for Junho to buckle in. She slammed the vehicle into gear and floored the accelerator. The Black Widow surged forward, the sheer torque of the engine pinning her to the seat. She didn't aim for the exit. She aimed for Elias. The traitor's eyes went wide as the massive grille of the transport filled his vision. He fired a desperate shot that shattered against the reinforced glass, and then he was gone, thrown aside like a rag doll as the vehicle roared over the spot where he had stood. They hit the closing steel gate at 60 miles per hour. The impact was a bone-shaking explosion of sparks and screaming metal. Tiana gripped the wheel until her knuckles turned white, her vision swimming as the gate buckled and tore from its hinges. For a terrifying second, the vehicle tipped, balanced on the edge of the cliffside road, before slamming back down onto the asphalt. They were out. The cool night air rushed through the shattered vents of the transport. Behind them, the park estate was a silhouette of fire and failure. Tiana kept her foot on the gas, her eyes locked on the winding road ahead, until the lights of the city began to twinkle in the distance like fallen stars. Is he okay?" Tiana gasped, her voice trembling as the adrenaline began to drain away, leaving her hollow and shaking. Minho was huddled over his father in the passenger seat. Junho was pale, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. But as Tiana pulled the car into a hidden alleyway beneath the bridge, a place the syndicate wouldn't look, Junho's hand reached out. He didn't grab the gun. He didn't grab the dashboard. He grabbed Tiana's hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, his skin cold but his grip desperate. "You stayed," he whispered, a single tear tracking through the blood on his cheek. "I told you," Tiana said, her voice finally breaking as she leaned her forehead against the steering wheel, the $500 bill still crumpled in her pocket. "Just for today. But I think today is going to last a long, long time." They had survived the dragon's fall. And in the silence of the armored tomb, amidst the smell of cordite and sweat, Tiana realized the biggest twist of all. She wasn't just a mom for a day. She was the only thing that could make the dragon human again. The first light of dawn began to bleed across the horizon, painting the Atlantic in shades of bruised purple and soft gold. In a small, secluded safe house owned by a contact Junho had kept hidden even from Elias, the air was finally still. The clinical smell of antiseptic had replaced the scent of gunpowder, and for the first time in 48 hours, Tiana felt she could draw a breath that didn't taste like fear. Junho lay on a sofa, his torso wrapped in heavy bandages. He looked smaller without the charcoal suits and the aura of untouchable power, but his eyes, clear and focused, were fixed on the window where Minho was curled up in a chair, finally asleep. Tiana walked over, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She sat on the floor beside the sofa, the exhaustion settling into her bones like lead. She looked down at her hands. They were stained, calloused, and trembling. "My accountants reached out through the secure line," Junho said, his voice a low gravel. "Elias is gone. The syndicate. They are in disarray. They didn't expect the dragon to have a guardian angel from the 4th Street district." Tiana let out a tired, watery laugh. "I'm no angel, Junho. I'm just a woman who didn't like seeing a kid cry." Junho reached out, his hand covering hers. This time there was no hesitation, no calculation. "You gave him more than a day, Tiana. You gave him a future. And you gave me a mirror. I didn't like what I saw in it, but I'm grateful I had the chance to look." He reached into the pocket of his discarded jacket and pulled out a heavy, ornate envelope. He handed it to her. Inside was not just the $500 bill, cleaned and pressed, but a deed. It was the title to a small, beautiful building in the heart of the city. A place with high ceilings, large windows, and enough space for a premier interior design studio. "I can't take this," Tiana whispered, her heart skipping. "This is too much." "It's not a gift," Junho said, his gaze intense. "It's an investment. In a woman who knows the value of a soul. The city needs more of that. And Minho, he's going to need a tutor. Someone to teach him that the world isn't just made of shadows and glass." Tiana looked at the sleeping boy. He looked peaceful, his small hand tucked under his chin. The hollow look in his eyes had been replaced by the quiet confidence of a child who knew he was loved. I'm not going back to the docks, Tiana, Junho continued, a sense of finality in his tone. I'm dismantling the syndicate's hold. It will be dangerous and it will take time, but I want my son to grow up in a world where he doesn't have to buy a mother for $500. Tiana stood up and walked to the window, watching the sun finally crest over the waves. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that felt new, washed clean by the violence they had endured. She felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known, a realization that her invisibility had been her greatest strength. She had seen what no one else saw, and in doing so she had saved a kingdom from its own darkness. So, she said, turning back to him with a soft, genuine smile. Does this mean the dragon is retiring? Junho leaned back, a rare, true smile touching his lips. The dragon is resting. But the father is just getting started. Minho stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about ice cream in the park. Tiana walked over and tucked the blanket tighter around his shoulders. She felt a deep, resonant peace. She had walked into a crosshair and come out with a family. The one-day bargain had turned into a lifetime of belonging. As she looked at the two men in the room, the broken king and the healing prince, she knew that her life would never be the same. She was no longer a shadow in the city. She was the light that had brought the dragon home. Thank you all for staying with us through this incredible journey. This story reminds us that kindness isn't just a gesture. It's a force of nature. If Tiana and Minho's bond touched your heart today, please leave a comment with the word family below so I know you made it to the end. Don't forget to subscribe for more emotional high-stakes stories every week. How would you have spent that $500? I can't wait to read your thoughts. Until next time, take care of each other.